All right, welcome everyone to the My HR Genius monthly webinar. Sorry, like blowing air there at the beginning. Anyway, my name's Kevin Mosher, and I'm an MSBA certified labor and employment law specialist up here in the Thompson Co. Minneapolis office. And I'm excited to present to you the topic of this month, which is so you want to understand how Fmla ADA work comp, the Bermuda Triangle trifecta of employment and HR law and paid leaves interact in a pandemic. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to touch on everybody's favorite topic of the last year, which is COVID-related matters. And, you know, I know from experience that, you know, in working with a lot of companies that this has been a big deal the last year. So, you know, those of you in HR who are really, really good at ADA accommodations and understanding FMLA have had a leg up on, and a lot of, the last year has been really good for you to utilize your skill set and experience. It's been pretty taxing, I think. A lot of employees have suddenly claimed disabilities and all that. So, and then obviously there's a lot of disabilities like, you know, depression and anxiety and those sorts of things that have been either exacerbated or triggered by COVID-related isolation and working from home and all that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about a lot of this. I want to give you a baseline framework. That's how we're going to say that. I'm going to give you a baseline framework of understanding all of these laws, and then we're going to talk about some scenarios and pepper in applications throughout. That's my plan. If you are new to the webinar, welcome. This is a monthly webinar that we've been doing for over 8 years now, and I'm really excited to present it every month, and it is being recorded. So good news for you, you can only hear me. So if you sneeze or something like that, no worries. Nobody's going to be recorded forever and be on this forever sneezing. Except for me. It will be posted if you want to re-listen to it or have somebody else on your team or share it. It'll be posted on the myhrgenius.co website, and where you can find all of our tips, and our weekly HR tips, our webinars, and podcasts as well that we put out if you are unfamiliar. Also, if you're new, there is a Q&A that you're welcome to type in questions. I can't guarantee that I'm going to always be able to get to all of them. I certainly get to most of them through the course of the webinar, and I certainly will try to touch on all of the questions. So definitely feel free to type in any of the questions that you have down in the webinar in that Q&A box, and I will try to get to them as we go. Okay. So yes, this is my pre-pandemic photo, and I got a memo that I'm going to get another photo next week. So I'm kind of excited about that. This is, I think, a couple years old. So, but anyway, I think people have said my smile looks insincere, and it's actually not insincere. It is actually just that I have a really terrible non-photogenic smile, or maybe just non-photogenic in generally. But in any event, that is a sadly sincere smile. But I think I should probably get a new photo. And I took up running, so I've lost some weight during COVID, which probably puts me in a fairly small percentage of the population. But so I should, a good new photo hopefully will do better for me. That's the hope, I guess. Anyway, okay. So topics that we're going to cover today, we are going to talk about the trifecta, the Fmla ADA work comp trifecta, and then we are going to talk about, we're going to pepper in some COVID, non-COVID leave of absence, just because I know a lot of employees are working from home. I think part of it is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit with examples, but I will say I wouldn't be surprised if not only does this continue, even though the pandemic numbers, COVID numbers seem to be, on the downswing. And not to say that they're gone, but I think they're on the downswing, and an increasingly larger percentage of the population continues to get vaccinated. And so hopefully that will, continue the numbers down. Although I know, like in Minnesota, our numbers are up over 10% in the last couple of weeks. But I think just, overall the numbers are decreasing around the country, and hopefully that just continues. But even with that, I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see employees with disabilities, medical conditions that are tangentially related to COVID. Again, the depressions, the anxieties, other sorts of like asthma and other respiratory illnesses where people are just, concerned. And I think part of it might be that, well, a couple things. One, we continue to have increased unemployment benefits. And I do think, despite what economists, who I think are just lying through their teeth, say that there is no incentive for employees, that employees are not seeking to stay unemployed because of enhanced unemployment benefits. And I would put that in the category of hogwash. I think there are a lot of people out there that are, and I'm not saying it's bad. Like if I'm going to be paid more to sit at home and hang out with the kids, or, play video games or something like that, honestly, I guess kind of sign me up. It seems like an appropriate economic decision to make, and I think a lot of people are making that decision, not wanting to return to work. And if they're getting close to or even more through unemployment benefits than they have been, while working, like who wouldn't sign up for that especially if you don't care all that much about your job and career trajectory. So yeah, I think a lot of people are going to continue because we do have, it's not as enhanced as it was for a while through COVID, but through the new stimulus package, I think we will continue to see a lot of employees remain at home. Now, they might not necessarily be eligible for unemployment if they have a disability, but because they're not looking for work. But then add into the fact that was like 97% of the population, the U.S. population is getting like this week and probably in the next couple of weeks more stimulus money. Again, why do most people work? It's for money. And if you're getting money and if you are concerned at all about your health and, why press something, why risk something, you might as well just stay at home. You might as well quit your job. You might as well just be on a leave of absence, not get paid. I just think there's less pressure on a lot of people because of the federal money that's out there, and these and state unemployment benefits subsidized by the federal government. I just think there's going to be, I don't think the desire for a leave of absence and not coming into work and not being as pressured to come into work monetarily, I don't think that's going to wane anytime soon. Maybe by the summer, but right now, I think now that people got a lot of money, I just see that a lot of people can't afford to stay home. And then we're going to walk through some response examples. Okay, so there it is. First tangent that I have started speaking about. Okay, so let's talk about the FMLA. Although the A somehow got down there. So okay, let's start with the FMLA and understand the FMLA. So the FMLA is, and I'm not going to get real deep into this today. If you want a deeper dive, I am certain that I have deep dive FMLA webinars. I also have deep dive ADA webinars that you can access through the myhrgenius.co website. But just as a general overview, what does the FMLA do? The FMLA covers a number of conditions. Obviously, it has like bonding leave as well after a couple has a baby or adopts, but that's not what we're really focused on here today. What we're really focused on is a serious medical condition. And so if somebody has a serious medical condition or if they have some sort of chronic condition, they are, assuming that they're an eligible employee, they have 1,250 hours in the last year and they've worked for at least a year with the company, and the company has 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius, yada, yada. So as long as there's eligibility, if the employee has a serious medical condition, then they would qualify potentially for FMLA. And the way we do FMLA is then you give the employee a medical certification, take it to the doctor, get it back within 15 days so that you can assess whether or not the employee meets the criteria for a serious medical condition. COVID is almost certainly going to be a serious medical condition. There's treatment in protocol in place, even if that treatment protocol is take some Advil, even if it's low symptomatic or asymptomatic. I don't know if low symptomatic is even something that people say, but if there are weak symptoms, if you're asymptomatic, you're still getting direction from a medical provider. You're still on some sort of treatment regimen, and you're going to be required to isolate, and you're going to be required to again take proactive measures to try to improve your health and obviously the safety of others around you. This is a serious medical condition under the FMLA. So if any of your employees have COVID, then they're almost certainly going to qualify for the FMLA, and you should be counting this against their 12-week per year FMLA entitlement. If you haven't been, no shame. That's okay. You're not in, there's a lot of other companies and organizations out there that are in the same boat. But can you, if somebody gets COVID, count it toward their FMLA? Absolutely. If somebody is isolated and they're not coming into work and they're not working, there's no work from home situation for them, but because of an exposure, then that's not FMLA. Because they don't have the serious health condition, you're just proactively keeping them off of work and away from the workplace, and totally legal and fine to do. Obviously, so you're not discriminating against them and treating them any differently, but you're doing that because of safety reasons. That doesn't mean that they're going to qualify for FMLA. So you're not going to count toward the 12-week entitlement those people who are just out for a week or two because of an exposure situation. So one other thing I would mention about the FMLA that's on this slide is that the FMLA does not require accommodations. That is only an ADA situation. It's very, very easy to confuse FMLA with ADA on the accommodation side of things. Now, if somebody has an intermittent leave scenario where they might need to miss like 3 hours here and there or half a day here and there because they've got some sort of medical condition or chronic condition, and it's intermittent leave, well, then in that situation, you could, under the regulations, move them to a position that is going to be more appropriate for somebody that has those sorts of intermittent leave needs, right? So if it's a position that you just cannot work with them, where they just like randomly have to leave for half a day, you can then move them to a different position in the organization. You got to kind of keep them at the same pay and benefits, but you can move them to a different position temporarily while the need for intermittent leave is ongoing, and then you move them back when it's done, assuming that they still have FMLA time. The other thing with FMLA is if you move somebody in an intermittent leave, FMLA, you count the 12 weeks only for time missed. So if you move somebody to a different position because of an intermittent leave scenario, or maybe you do a work from home scenario, if somebody with COVID or who's gotten exposure is not going to be FMLA anyway. But let's just say somebody has COVID and they're asymptomatic, but obviously you're not going to let them come into the workplace if your workplace is even open. You are going to have them work from home. If they work from home and they work full time, then FMLA is not even triggered. You don't even have to count the FMLA. But if they can't work, or if they work partially, you're going to count the non-work period against their FMLA 12-week entitlement. Hopefully that's clear. So again, it might trigger FMLA that the person has COVID, but ultimately we don't really, I don't want to say we don't care about FMLA, but we don't use the FMLA, we don't use that 12-week entitlement unless the person actually misses work. And when they actually miss work, then it's unpaid. Now you can require that they use paid time off, except under the FFCRA when that was a thing, and it's still a thing if you are voluntarily doing the FFCRA. And while I'm on that tangent, under the new stimulus, the Biden stimulus, $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, you might have heard about it. The FFCRA has been continued on a voluntary basis for all employers. They took out the the small employer exception. They took out the healthcare industry exception, and they took out the large employer exception. So if you have 10,000 employees, you can now voluntarily opt into the FFCRA. And also, the new stimulus also renewed the 80 hours for the FMLA. So if somebody used up their 80 hours last year in 2020 because they got COVID or exposure or whatever, there's a brand new 80 hours that you can now get credit for and get dollar for dollar credit up to the limits if the person qualifies under the FFCRA. Same qualification criteria as we did in 2020 under the FFCRA. The only difference now is that it's just going to count the 80 hours, and then also it's going to be voluntary. So your organization doesn't have to do it, and I think most companies are probably done with the FFCRA. But if you're a company or an organization that wants to give free time off because you're going to get reimbursed by the federal government for it, that's fine. There it is. There's a program for you. The other thing to mention under the my throat went there. The other thing to mention under the FMLA is that it is job protection. Somebody just asked when the FFCRA renews, and I believe March 31st. Is when and then it expires at the end of the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. September 30th, I think is the last. Anyway, it's the last day of September. So the FFCRA goes into then. We're going to talk about COBRA as well during this presentation, and it's the same time period for the COBRA reimbursement as well under certain circumstances. So I'll touch on that later. But the FMLA also has job protection. So if somebody's on FMLA, they have to be returned to their same or equivalent job. So if it's a COVID or an anxiety or depression, related type of scenario here where somebody is out of work and they take their full 12 weeks, if they come back, at the end of that 12 weeks or within that 12 weeks before fully exhausting their FMLA, their job is protected. And I'm sure that, in a lot of your situations, that's not easy to do. And you might have had to hire somebody. You might have had to bring them back in and move people around, shuffle. Those are all good reasons, but it's a very rare scenario, really only for key employees, where you really can't bring them back unless, and key employees are top 10% of your wage earners, salaried individuals, where you can't say no to bringing them back. Now, obviously, if the job's been eliminated, a lot of jobs were eliminated in the last year. If the job was eliminated in the meantime, that person has no greater return to their job. You don't have to place them into a job that doesn't exist. But if the job exists and they're gone for the 12 weeks, then with very limited exception, you're supposed to bring them back into that position, the same pay and benefits, assuming no global changes were made. Also, while they're on FMLA, their eligibility for group medical benefits continues, and so this is a situation where you wouldn't put them on COBRA when they're on FMLA. You wouldn't do COBRA until their FMLA exhausts and they can't return and meet the eligibility criteria for your group medical plan, which would be defined in your summary plan description. So anytime somebody calls me and they're like, hey, this person's on ADA and, we're thinking about accommodating them with with a leave of absence, and it might be a couple months, how does that work with COBRA? And the answer is, take a look at your summary plan description, and then you'll see what the eligibility is. And if the eligibility for group medical benefits expires because the person's not working, then you're going to trigger your COBRA obligation for them. And somebody just said that they're having issues with audio, and I sorry, I think it might be just your computer, since I'm getting other questions. I assume other people are listening, and including people in my office. I think people would probably they would probably come knocking on my door, I think, if it were a global issue. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, so FMLA during a pandemic. So we've touched on some of this, but here's the criteria for a serious health condition. We've got inpatient care. That could actually be triggered by COVID. I mean, I think we probably know people or have heard of people, lots and lots of people that have needed inpatient care because of contracting COVID. So we've got serious health condition with inpatient care that clearly triggers FMLA, as well as the continuing treatment, 3 or more days of incapacity. Again, this is all going to be COVID, hit on COVID. But again, it could be COVID related too. It doesn't have to be actually COVID. It could be the flu. It could be allergies. It could be depression, anxiety. It could be any of these things. It could be a chronic condition as well, but it could be anything that triggers a more than 3-day incapacity. It doesn't have to just be COVID. It doesn't have to just be pneumonia. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be like a named disease or infection or whatever that we know of. It really just has to be whatever is happening to that person. It took them out for more than 3 days. They couldn't work. And they went to a doctor, a medical doctor. We don't care what the name is, but if they come back with a medical certification that they're being treated by a doctor, they're under a regimen of care, it's going to be covered under the FMLA, assuming all the eligibility rules. Last thing, and then we're going to, I think, move on to the ADA. If the employee quits at the end of the leave and they don't return for a period of time, and I think that period of time is like 30 days, but if they don't return, and there are some exceptions to why they can't return, like if they can't for medical reasons and that sort of thing, then you could actually, but they just voluntarily don't come back, and that happens, then you could actually go after them for the group medical premiums, the employer portion of the group medical premiums that you had subsidized during their FMLA leave of absence. Okay, so moving on to ADA. So FMLA definitely is going to be involved, right, in how we address pandemic related things. So ADA, same thing. We've talked about anxiety, depression. That's what is very, very commonplace, increasingly commonplace this last year. I think I've had to talk and deal with depression and anxiety regarding employee-related issues, more this year than any probably 5 years combined in my practice. So it's just a thing that we probably all are dealing with one or more employees and situations. And again, I don't see it lessening anytime soon for a variety of reasons, and some of which I've already talked about. But what the ADA does is there are two components to it. And there's a discrimination component. We're not going to talk too much about that, but you can't discriminate against people because of their disability, right? I think we get it. Just like race, just like age, just like gender, just like, all these sorts of things. We can't discriminate against people because of a disability, whether it's real or perceived disability. If you perceive COVID as a disability and you fire the person because they have COVID, that's, potentially, COVID's not really a disability, but you're perceiving it as a disability. It could be even potentially covered and protected by the ADA. And there's also an anti-retaliation provision. But more importantly for this webinar's purpose is that the ADA requires that you make reasonable accommodations. So there's really 3 components to the ADA. There's that you make reasonable accommodations for people with known disabilities, that you not discriminate against people, and that you not retaliate against people who are asking to be accommodated. And it's the retaliation portion, and it's the failure to accommodate portion that we are starting to see a lot of threatened lawsuits, actual lawsuits, and problems come up. When employees come to you and they say, hey, I've got this, that, or the other condition or medical issue or whatever it is, and I can't come into work. Okay, yeah, we're frustrated, right? We expect the person to come into work. We need the person to come into work. And and then if they're not coming into work, we're going to be frustrated. I get that. But if they aren't coming in because of a medical condition that's potentially a disability under the ADA, we really need to engage them in this interactive process approach where we talk to them, and here's the approach, right? We talk to the employee, we understand what they're asking, we get more information about their medical restrictions. We ultimately really don't care what their condition is. I don't care what name you put on it. It could be cancer, it could be I don't know, it doesn't matter to me. It could be pneumonia, it could be whatever, pneumonia, although pneumonia is temporary. It could be depression, anxiety, it could be cancer, it could be leukemia, which is, I guess, cancer. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. To me, as a neutral employer, HR person, it really doesn't matter to me what their condition is. What matters to me is what are the restrictions. And oftentimes we need information from the doctor on that. And so many of you might have a form that you give to the employee to take to the doctor to complete, to give you more information about the impact of the condition. And that's the key, right? Like because like somebody might have a disability, but if they're not limited in their job, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm sure it matters to them, and they're human beings and everything like that, and we care, right? Because we're in HR, right? So we automatically care. Being in HR means you automatically have like a care bone in your body. Being an attorney means you took that care bone out. But so I used to have it from HR, and now I removed it once I became an attorney. But most people in HR still have a care bone, and that care bone means that you care about them as a person. But from an HR perspective, from a legal perspective, we really don't care if they're not being impacted in their ability to do their job. And so we focus on that. How are they impacted in their ability or inability to do the essential functions of their job? So in that situation, we might need to get medical information. We might need to get information from the doctor and the employee, and then we engage in this conversation with the employee, and we talk to them. Okay, your doctor says you're restricted from doing A, B, and C. You and your doctor, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get, because A, B, and C mean that you need to be able to do them. Now, let's just put this into a context of a work from home, which is what so many people are asking for right now. And they're saying, well, I worked from home during the height of COVID, and now, the office is back running or the factory's back running. Why can't I work from home now? And so this is a tricky conversation to have, because so many employees who have always wanted to work from home and not have their supervisors breathing down their necks, and to be able to go and do workouts in the middle of the day, or go for their runs in the middle of the day, or see their kids and have a relaxing lunch or take naps, right? Like this is like the greatest time for so many people in their lives, being able to work from home, and their supervisors having no, like they can't tell them no because the government's closed down the offices. Well, now they're being told to go back to work. And a lot of these people don't want to go back to work, but they're being told they have to. So now they're either making up disabilities or they have anxiety because they have to go back to work, whatever it is. We have to get to the heart of it. We have to get to the understanding. And so the request is often, well, they can't do that. They've got this disability, this condition, and because of COVID, it's making it difficult for them. They can't just come into the office, and because they're at risk, and it could worsen their whatever, asthma, their cancer, their whatever it is. It could worsen it. So the only accommodation that the employee wants is to work from home. Okay. Now, what the law requires is that you provide a reasonable accommodation, not necessarily the one the employee wants. And so I start from, if that's a job that needs to be performed in person, and it's more efficiently performed in person, and it's not well performed at home, and now we're doing the job in person, you can say to the employee, hey, look, this is a job that is more effective here. And the employee will say, but I was doing it just fine from home. You're going to have that puts you in a little bit of a bind. So you either, one, want to demonstrate to the employee that when they were doing the job from home, they were doing a crappy job at it, and it was inefficient and it wasn't working. Maybe that was just like out of necessity. And anyway, you might be able to argue back on that Two, you could try to work with them and to say, okay, yeah, here is the work that we have for you to work from home. It might be full-time, it might be part-time. And if you can do it, you should try to reasonably do it and give it the old college try. If it doesn't work after giving it the old college try, you can go back and continue to have this. This is an ongoing conversation with the employee, to go back to them and to say, hey, it's not working for us. This work from home thing for you, it's not working for us. Everybody's back in the office and you're just not efficient and all this. So this isn't working. What else do you suggest? And the employee and the doctor will say, well, we can't go back in the office and now we can't work from home. We don't have any other suggestions, at which point they either go on FMLA, or in that situation, with the FMLA, if the FMLA is expired, you then are in this ADA accommodation situation, and you would say, well, you could take a leave of absence, an unpaid leave of absence, or use up your PTO, whatever it is, but unpaid leave of absence until you can come back with or without a reasonable accommodation. But it's really important along the way that you show that you are trying to work with them. And I get it. It's going to be, these are difficult conversations to have with employees because so many employees were working remotely, and so they know it's possible. And so to tell the employee that it's unreasonable now to accommodate them to work from home, this puts a lot of employers in a bind. Unless you can articulate why it's unreasonable, you're going to have, it's the makings of a lawsuit, I'm telling you right now. So I would really caution against a hard no on the work from home unless you can really articulate why it's unreasonable to work from home. Otherwise, I just generally recommend that part of this interactive process, if work from home is a solution, that and it's the only solution, they can't go back to the office no matter what you do, that you at least try. And if they fail, then at least you've shown that you've tried to accommodate them, and that'll go a lot longer in defending against a potential lawsuit. Okay, somebody said some questions. Would I say that most companies will end the FFCRA benefit March 31st? Honestly, I think most companies ended the FFCRA benefit on December 31st. I think those companies that extended it, and I'm just guessing, right, because I haven't polled anybody, but I think most companies that extended it through the 31st will probably continue to do so through September 30th, so with the renewed 80 hours effective April 1. So I fully expect that those companies that have continued it into 2021, and again, it became voluntary on January 1 of 2021. I expect those companies will continue because people are getting used to it. Okay, somebody asked a really good question on the ADA as part of this interactive process where we're getting the medical information. So if the question I'm just kind of translating, if we as a company send the employee a document and we require to be filled out and the employee was given a deadline, it's now past the deadline and the employee has not shown up for work in the last few days, is it okay to terminate them? So here's what I would, and no FMLA is at issue. Here's what I recommend in that situation. It's not in any of these slides, but this is just a really good practice pointer for you, and this is how I approach it. So if there's ambiguity on this, what I recommend doing is sending a letter to the employee outlining exactly this. We gave you information to return to us by this date. You failed to do so. We were willing to, talk about accommodations, and then you've stopped, so your leave has not been approved, and you're a no-call, no-show. It is our understanding that you have based on your actions, that you voluntarily resigned your employment. We wish you well in the future. So put it out there. It leaves, and just say, if we have any misunderstanding on this, please contact me immediately. Leave the door open a crack. It shows that you're not trying to do like a jump at them gotcha game, like, we got you procedurally, like you're fired right away. Like that's, not that that's the worst thing in the world, but we don't want to do that. We want to leave the door open a little bit of crack, just enough to show, hey, we're still willing to work with you. This is all on you, buddy. Like, you failed. We were trying to do this in good faith, and there you go. You went in, didn't show up for work. So we just assume this to be a voluntary termination. You give us a call if we have a misunderstanding. Maybe they'll call. Most of the times they don't. But then you've got great documentation showing that you've been trying to work with them the whole time, and they they did this on their own. So that's my recommendation. Then you have a nice document as well in the event there is a lawsuit. As far as reasonable accommodations go, one thing that I want to say is a lot of you have probably dealt with the ADA, and I wish I could give you some certainty as to what is reasonable and what is not reasonable, but obviously I don't know. It really is going to be job specific. There's no way for you as an organization to say like, oh, this is what's reasonable, this is what's unreasonable. You have to look at it at each job level and then compare that against the employee's medical. Now, what courts have said is that indefinite leaves of absence, which a lot of these employees during COVID are asking for because we don't know when COVID's going to end, a lot of employees are saying, hey, I've got asthma, cancer, whatever it is. I can't come back and be potentially exposed. And the doctor says, and also a lot of them are like, just other ones, pretend illnesses too, but whatever. So the doctor says, look, employee can't come back. And until COVID's over. Well, who knows if and when COVID ever will be over. So it's effectively an indefinite leave of absence. And the courts are pretty clear that indefinite leaves of absence are not reasonable. They're just patently unreasonable. So, and it's probably going to be unreasonable in your situation too. I mean, maybe you have a crazy situation where indefinite leave of absence isn't unreasonable, but probably not. So if it is an indefinite leave of absence, we want the doctor to say that. We want them to commit to that, because then we can just say, well, we just can't work with that. And then you can say, you know what, sayonara, and you're welcome to apply for any future jobs that are available once you're ready to return with or without restrictions. So basically, you cancel them. They're done. You don't have to put them on a leave of absence. You just, you terminate them in your system because you cannot accommodate them. If you want to keep them on the payroll, that's fine. I wouldn't pay them. I take them off benefits. They're almost certainly going to be COBRA triggered. So that's my recommendation on how to handle that. But just, patently unreasonable, indefinite leaves of absence. Okay, we covered a bunch of this stuff. We've kind of covered all this. What is a disability? Yeah, I don't know. I can tell you what the definition of a disability, which is a physical or a mental condition that substantially limits one or more of life's major activities. Work being one of more of life's major activities. So that's how they define it. That's how the law is defined. So not every condition. Certainly not every condition is going to be a, quote, disability covered by the law. But what I normally tell, on these webinars is don't play doctor. Unless you are a doctor, don't play doctor. Don't try to figure out if it's a disability. Don't try to argue with me or the courts that, oh, this person's not disabled, because they're going to get a doctor as an expert saying that they're disabled. And you versus the doctor is not going to pan out very well to a jury. So best to just kind of take this approach rather than putting all of your eggs in the basket of the person not having a disability. Okay. Knowledge. Again, to accommodate somebody, we have to have knowledge. Now, that's not something that we've had a problem with COVID. I think there's been a lot of people going to doctors when they can get in. There's a lot of knowledge about COVID, about other conditions related to COVID. And so, this is being passed on to HR. So I think now I will say this, we don't have knowledge that somebody's disabled if they don't say it. And there's probably an increased likelihood of people not saying that they have other conditions, like, maybe they're hiding something. But when they're working from home, there's not as much interaction, not as much like seeing people physically. So yeah, if somebody's got a condition and they're working from home and you haven't seen them, or they're, remote working and you just don't have that connection where you're seeing like, hey, they're really struggling with something. Well, yeah, then you don't have, quote, knowledge. And so you can't then be second-guessed after the fact as to why you didn't try to accommodate the person. So just to let you know, you have to have knowledge, but employers have to have knowledge before they can be second-guessed on why they didn't accommodate somebody. Somebody wrote an email, okay, a friend of mine works from home due to COVID, has an autoimmune disease. He would prefer to work from home, but is not sure if the employer would accommodate. Even though he's been home for a year, what do you suggest? So yeah, first of all, I never advise individuals. But generally I only represent companies, so I'm always on the flip side of this. But generally, I just think it's really good for employers and employees to have conversations about this and what the needs are. And again, the employer should be getting the medical information and determining what the accommodations, if any, are necessary, and maybe work from home works for this job. Maybe it doesn't. The one thing I didn't mention with accommodations, and then we're going to, I think, move on to work comp very briefly, and then get into our scenarios, is that with the ADA, what the ADA does not require is that you lower your expectations for that employee, for that individual. So if the person is supposed to perform at like 100, let's just say on a scale, 100, right? Because they're disabled, maybe like in this guy's situation, he has an autoimmune disease. Because he has an autoimmune disease, that doesn't mean that the employer has to lower their expectations for him from 100 to 80 or to 90 or whatever. They don't have to lower them at all. The expectations continue to be 100. The only thing that's required by the law is that you have to, as an employer, you have to provide reasonable accommodations to get them up to 100. But ultimately, whatever the accommodation is, whether it's work from home or work in the office, whatever, if they're not performing at 100, and if you counsel and discipline and ultimately fire people for not performing at 100, it doesn't matter that they're disabled. It doesn't matter that they're working from home. It doesn't matter that they were on FMLA previously. That's why we have to document. That's why we have to counsel people if they're not meeting expectations. And nothing under the law, the ADA, requires that we lessen expectations. A lot of employers, a lot of managers think that's the case. That's not the case. Now, I wouldn't recommend suddenly disciplining and counseling somebody that you've never counseled in the past. Like maybe they were a bad performer for a long, long time, and now suddenly that they're working from home because they've disclosed that they have a disability. Maybe now suddenly you're counseling them and monitoring their performance more than you ever did in the past. I don't think that's probably a good idea. But if you've always been good at managing your employees and communicating with them about expectations, and hopefully all of your managers and HR people are, but I know that's not always the case, especially with managers who are often notoriously bad, especially here in Minnesota. Like everybody's super passive aggressive, so nobody tells people what they that they're doing a bad job. If you've been historically bad at it, now is not the time to become good at it, because that would look like retaliation or discrimination. But anyway, just to let you know, you don't have to lower your expectations. Okay, types of accommodations. So type of accommodations, we've been talking about work from home. That's one type of accommodation, but again, it's an accommodation. It's not the best accommodation. So modifications to job duties, modifications, adjustments, the work environment, work from home. These are all things that are potential accommodations. And again, like I had mentioned before, we have to exhaust all potential accommodations before you fire somebody. If the employer, the doctor is just saying this is the only accommodation I can do, that the employee can do, they can only work from home because of pandemic going on and they can't pick up COVID, all these sorts of things. If the only potential accommodation is work from home, then try it if it's reasonable. And if that's not reasonable, the second only potential accommodation is a leave of absence, unpaid leave of absence. And then you would put the person on an unpaid leave of absence. And if it's indefinite, maybe you just call their employment over. If it's for a long time, make an assessment. Can we reasonably accommodate the person and try to hold their job open? And if not, then again, you might want to call it and tell them you just can't accommodate them in that way, and you end their employment. But if you can accommodate them with a short-term leave of absence, if that works for you, then the law requires that you do it if all other accommodations were not available. I already mentioned all this just a minute ago. So anyway, here's my lower expectations. We do not need to lower expectations. So even for slackers. Okay. Just going to skip through. Okay, so work comp. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on work comp, but the interplay with the key with work comp is that if somebody's out on work comp, that it does at least, unless there's a state law, because there is at least one state that doesn't let you do this. But generally, work comp runs concurrent with the FMLA. So if the person's on work comp and they're missing work, like if they're doing light duty work on work comp, then obviously no FMLA, because FMLA is a time off work statute law. But if work comp is, if it's time off work for work comp and they're getting wage benefits, then you want to concurrently put them on FMLA as well. Now, most work comp statutes, they require that if the job still exists, that you bring the employee back to their position, and you can't retaliate against an employee. But work comp doesn't guarantee employment like FMLA does. So if somebody's off and they're on FMLA and they're burning up their FMLA and they return from FMLA and work comp at the end of their FMLA period, well, you have to put them back into their previous position. Like it's like pretty much a hard return. Obviously limited exceptions, but very limited exceptions, as opposed to work comp, where there's really not as much of a guarantee that they go back into their previous job. Some states have, some loose requirements that you do it, but for the most part, it's not nearly as strict in most every state as it is with the requirement to reinstate them into their previous employment, like the FMLA does. And then with the ADA is very similar in that, with the person having like a leave of absence, again, you don't normally get too much into the ADA with work comp, except that, again, ADA might be having these, a leave of absence as an accommodation, and maybe the person's on work comp, and so they kind of correlate at the same time. But again, ADA, FMLA, these are all unpaid leaves of absence, whereas the work comp might be, the person might be getting wage loss benefits because of the workplace injury for some or all of their time that they can't work. But if they're not working because of an ADA issue, as opposed to the work injury issue, then they probably aren't going to be getting the wage loss benefits, and you've probably settled up with them on an MMI. And I'm really sorry that all these slides are completely like the format is completely whacked out on them. At least on mine it is. So okay, let's get into. Okay, we're going to talk about some. One other thing I wanted to mention on work comp is that during the pandemic, a lot of states, so 17 of the states, expanded work comp benefits to include work-related illnesses. So a handful of states, mainly California and Wyoming, were the two main states that really expanded work comp. And so for example, I think last summer, if memory serves, in like May, the governor in California said, hey, yeah, you can return to work. You can return to the workplace, but if you do return to the workplace, then and you get sick, then there's going to be a presumption that that you got COVID from the workplace, and so you're going to qualify for work comp benefits, right? So it was a backhanded way of saying employers don't return everybody in the state of California to the office. You can, but if people get sick, they're going to go on your work comp. Wyoming did something similar. Some other states like Minnesota, Utah, Wisconsin extended work comp benefits to certain industries. So in Minnesota, for example, we extended work comp to first responders, and also to I think it's first responders, and then also certain healthcare workers as well. And it's not that to say that they're guaranteed coverage, but they became eligible, and there became a presumption that they picked up COVID in the line of work, so that work comp benefits have been eligible for a lot of employees in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Utah, and also in Illinois and New York and Vermont for other essential workers. So in these states, work comp benefits were extended. In other states, in most of the country, work comp benefits, the laws didn't change. And so in very few circumstances then would an employee be able to credibly argue and prove that they got COVID through the workplace, and their injury and their time off work was attributable to COVID that they picked up, that, an injury from the workplace. And there have already been cases around the country on this where courts have been denying coverage, upholding the denial of coverage by carriers. And again, it's just these handful of states where we've seen some differences in that. Okay, let's go through just a couple timelines here, and then we're going to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody's attention. Okay, so we've got patient 101. So here's what we're going to do. So we've got somebody, and I've already kind of gone through some of this, but let's just say you've got an employee. They receive information that they've got a COVID positive test for themselves, right? Okay, so we're immediately thinking, let's just say, we're immediately thinking, oh my gosh, did everybody else? Did anybody have contact? And maybe we have to do some tracing. This is assuming that the person's not working remotely, right? If they're working remotely, we probably don't care all that much about how this is playing out, unless they just can't work entirely. But if they're working, they're back in the office, they're back on the shop floor. This is, we have to address this, right? So COVID positive tests, obviously we're going to do safety protocols, and we're going to apply whatever our safety protocol is in our preparedness plans. We're going to look at that, and we're going to do tracing and, communications to employees to make sure to, watch for symptoms and that sort of thing. All the stuff that we've been doing during the height of COVID. I think most of us are pretty good about we've figured out our communication and response protocols, and I think we've had to implement them multiple times in the last year. So we do that with the employee, right? So we do that, and then second, we're going to determine if we're going to have FFCRA. For most of you, probably not. You're probably not voluntarily doing FFCRA. Maybe you are, but that's fine. If there's FFCRA, then we're going to count the FMLA. So we're going to count this time toward the FMLA as well, and then they're going to get paid under the FFCRA, and you're going to get reimbursed through your quarterly FICA contributions reimbursement from the IRS for a dollar-for-dollar payment that you make to the employee for the time that they're covered under the FFCRA. So you're going to place them on place them on FMLA, place them on FFCRA. You cannot, under the FFCRA principles, you cannot make them use their PTO. If you're not under FFCRA, you can make them use their sick leave or PTO up in this situation. Depends on what your policy reads. So it's kind of up to you, but this is how we look at it, right? So we determine is the person going to get paid or not? And, no FFCRA is available. Okay, fine. Do we have PTO? What's our policy? Do we force them to use PTO? How do we do that with FMLA? Maybe we make them use half their PTO while they're on FMLA, and they can still reserve the other half so they can take a vacation to Vegas or something like that later in the year to pick up COVID again later. Although honestly, I would love to go to Vegas so much at this point that not that I have gone to Vegas, but it sounds so enticing. Okay, so sun sounds so enticing, actually, although it's starting to look like spring again in Minnesota today. Okay, so then we go to the fourth. So then if the employee is unable to return to work after the FMLA is exhausted, let's just say it's like a long-term illness, COVID triggers other things. They're too afraid. The doctor says no, they're susceptible. They've got underlying conditions. They can't come back to the office. FMLA is exhausted. What do? Then we go into, we don't automatically terminate them. No automatic, seriously, repeat, no automatic terminations or administrative terminations at the end of FMLA. Too many companies have been sued for too much money because of automatic administrative terminations at the expiration of FMLA. We then go to at least an initial conversation about ADA interactive process to determine whether or not, well, first of all, we might have to determine whether or not the person has a disability. And then second of all, assuming they do, they have some sort of condition, we then need to gather the information from the medical provider and from the employee to understand what their restrictions are. And if they're saying there's no way for them to come back to work, if there is any way for them to come back to work, we try to do that. But if there's no way for them to reasonably come back to work and there's no accommodation that we can make and they just want to work from home, then we have to look at the job, we have to talk to the manager, we have to understand, can we reasonably accommodate a work from home scenario with that employee and get so that they continue to work. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. And if you can, you should try. And if you ultimately can't because you've tried or because you just know you can't, because the work, you can't work as a factory loader from home. It just doesn't work. You have to load the trucks there in person, for example. So no work from home. You then say, look, we can't work from you. You can't come in per your medical notes. How much time do you need? And they say a leave of absence. How long? Again, this is all part of the conversation. You need to get this information from them. And they say indefinite. Well, see you later. Sorry, we can't work with you like that. You're welcome to apply for future jobs as they become available. If the employee says a month, I think you're probably going to have to try to accommodate them. If they say 2 months, I mean, think about it. Beyond 2 months, I think most juries, most courts would say that's pretty unreasonable to hold a job open. But really, this is going to be a case-by-case determining situation. So you really have to look at your needs, your budget, the employee's anticipated length. If the employee's doctor says, well, 1 month and then we're going to have another appointment to figure it out, then what I would say is I would tell the employee, you know what, we'll try it for a month, but I'm telling you right now, a month is going to be really difficult for us. And if it's going to continue, we might have to reassess. So it's kind of like what I say, and those of you who have listened to me for a while have probably heard me say, it's like the shot across the bow. You're putting it out there that this is becoming an increasing problem for you. You're not going to blindside the employee on this. This is becoming an increasing problem for you that you're accommodating, but oh my gosh, we're still going to try because that's the type of company we are. We are trying to do the best we can. And that's what you want to show a jury. If there's ultimately a lawsuit, you want to show a jury that you tried as hard as you could, and ultimately it was the employee's issue because they couldn't come into work, they couldn't do their job, and that's not your problem. So I'm going to wrap this up with one final thing. So let's just say COBRA, because I promised you COBRA. So let's just say that you put the person on a leave of absence, they're not meeting the summary plan description, eligibility for being on your group medical plan, and so then you're going to COBRA them, right? Okay, well, starting April 1 until the end of the federal fiscal year, under the new Biden $1.9 trillion stimulus plan, it's like the American Recovery Plan, whatever it's called, 2021 American Recovery Plan, then in that situation, and you put the person on COBRA, there's like, I think 6 triggers of eligibility. Well, first of all, everybody that does COBRA, if you're not familiar with this American Recovery Plan, whatever it's called, you need to do a notice of this subsidy. So the subsidy is full COBRA payment for employees through the end of September. So if you put them on COBRA, they're going to get COBRA paid. Current people who are on COBRA, you'll take a look. We're going to put a tip out on this. If you're on the My HR Genius program, subscription program, and you get our tips, look for the tips. We'll put it out there. But all of your COBRA administrators are going to need to be kicking out notices to everybody on COBRA of their eligibility for this subsidy. You pay the medical premium, not the employee, through the end of September, and then you get reimbursed. We don't know exactly how the reimbursement is going to work, but it's probably going to work just like the FFCRA, where you get reimbursed on your quarterly Medicare payments. So that's on your FICA or Medicare. So it's probably going to work that way. But anyway, just to let you know, if the person goes on COBRA, they're going to be fully subsidized, assuming that they elect COBRA through the end of the federal fiscal year. And then somebody just asked, to verify the new federal stimulus, the FFCRA, the 80 hours resets for all who have already used it. If you follow that, and the answer is yes, it's a brand new, fresh 80 hours until the end of September. So yes, if they've used it before, they get a new 80 hours. And I've kind of already talked about this, implementing the accommodations. And then if you've tried, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on this topic, if you've tried an accommodation and if it didn't work, and if there are other accommodations out there, you should try them. Keep trying, rinse and repeat until you get to the point that that you've exhausted all potential accommodations and there's just nothing left out there, and then leave of absence or termination is your final recourse. Thank you. Hour's up. Thanks for your attention. The next webinar is a month from now, and it's so you want to understand the legal ins and outs of interviewing and recruiting. So not going to talk necessarily about COVID, but if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me at kmosher@thompsonco.com or call me at 651-389-5007. I hope everybody has a nice month.